Imagine a princess born into wealth and power, yet imprisoned in a nightmare so sinister that her very own family's secrets threaten to destroy her. This is the dark tale of Margarita Teresa, a royal daughter whose life, from its very inception, was dictated by incest and cruelty. Gaze upon the crumbling grandeur of dark royal chambers, Gothic arches looming over forgotten secrets, and the unsettling portraits of long-dead monarchs whose smiles seem to hide unspeakable truths. These aren't just shadows stretching across vaulted ceilings. They are the echoes of a past so dark, so disturbing, that its true horrors have remained largely undisclosed, buried beneath layers of opulent history. We journey back to early 18th century Spain, an empire still shimmering with a deceptive glory, yet behind its gilded facade a realm hiding dark, twisted secrets. Their relentless pursuit of bloodline purity, a desperate attempt to maintain their power and legacy, ironically introduced a poison into their very veins. Their lineage, a tangled knot of consanguineous marriages, set the stage for an inevitable horror that would not only manifest in physical deformities and mental frailties, but most tragically in the very personal torment of a young girl. Margarita Teresa was born into this world of both dazzling privilege and profound perversion. She was destined to be a living testament to the catastrophic consequences of a family history obsessed with self-preservation at any cost. Her life was not her own. It was a consequence, an extreme and heartbreaking symptom of a system diseased to its core. The walls of the Palacio Real, while grand and imposing, served not as a sanctuary, but as the ornate bars of her gilded cage, a prison where her innocent childhood vanished long before her youth. Margarita Teresa was not a standalone tragedy. She was the culmination of generations of calculated, yet catastrophic choices. Her life, already a dark consequence of centuries of inbreeding, further intersected with the ambitions and dysfunctions of her immediate family. Born in 1690, she was the daughter of King Philip V of Spain. While history often paints Philip V as a melancholic or weak-willed monarch, our narrative will delve into the far darker, more personal motivations that drove his actions concerning his daughter. His was not just a reign, but a deeply troubling personal saga that directly shaped Margarita's fate. Her mother, Maria Luisa of Savoy, remains a tragically marginalized figure in this story. A queen, yes, but also a pawn in the high-stakes game of royal dynastic marriages. She was a woman caught in the suffocating web of court expectation, largely complicit through silence or powerlessness, her voice, if ever raised, lost within the echo chambers of the palace. We must also acknowledge the omnipresent shadow of King Louis XIV of France. As Margarita's maternal grandfather, his own legacy of ambitious dynastic marriages and the resultant European power struggles heavily influenced the path of the Spanish Habsburgs, and by extension, Margarita's predetermined existence. The very concept of blood purity, so vital to Louis's vision of absolute monarchy, ultimately became a genetic ticking time bomb for his descendants. The Spanish court of the early 18th century was no mere glittering assembly. It was a hotbed of paranoia, petty rivalries, and deeply sinister familial bonds. The air itself seemed thick with unspoken compromises and simmering resentments. This was an environment where the pursuit of power and the rigid adherence to an increasingly corrupted bloodline superseded all notions of human decency or moral conduct. Advisors and courtiers, far from being a moral compass, were often simply power brokers, enablers, or silent witnesses, their own positions dependent on their acquiescence to the royal family's increasingly twisted norms. The relentless inbreeding that defined the Habsburgs of Spain was not just a theoretical concept. Its devastating effects were starkly visible. Generations of cousins marrying cousins, uncles marrying nieces, created a lineage plagued by severe genetic issues. What began as a strategic tool to consolidate power and wealth ultimately led to a tragic inheritance of physical deformities, chronic illnesses, and, most pertinent to our story, pervasive mental instability. The famous Habsburg jaw, a severe prognathism that made chewing and speaking difficult, was just one of the visible manifestations. But beyond the physical, the intellectual and psychological vulnerabilities were far more insidious, creating generations susceptible to delusion, depression, and a peculiar form of detachment from reality. Within this toxic crucible of genetic decay and social repression, Margarita Teresa was to be raised. She was not just a princess. She was a living embodiment of the ultimate cost of a dynasty's obsession with itself, a child born into a family that, through its own desperate attempts at self-preservation, had become its own worst enemy. The environment was not just stifling. It was designed to create a sense of isolation, to prevent any external influence from tainting the purity of the royal line. And it was in this stifling, self-contained world, a world meticulously crafted to preserve a twisted form of bloodline sanctity, that the most unthinkable transgression would occur, transforming Margarita's life into an unspeakable nightmare. It was against this backdrop of genetic peril and dynastic obsession that Margarita Teresa's personal nightmare unfolded. Her upbringing was a chilling example of a royal life completely devoid of normalcy, a childhood not nurtured but dictated, suffocated within the confines of an oppressive, closed royal household. From her earliest days, Margarita was caged, not just by the palace walls, but by the expectations and desires of a family driven by forces far beyond her comprehension. She was a possession, a vessel for a bloodline, rather than a child to be loved and protected. The most shocking and central conflict of her life was the unnatural, incestuous relationship fostered by her father, King Philip V. This was no fleeting rumor or court whisper. It was a pervasive, continuous reality. His motivations were complex and deeply disturbing. While historical accounts often attribute it to an extreme, twisted interpretation of bloodline preservation, a perverse attempt to keep the Habsburg purity intact within the most immediate family, there were undoubtedly darker, more personal psychological currents at play. Control, power, perhaps even warped affection, all contributed to this horrific dynamic. The notion that such a relationship could somehow strengthen the royal lineage, rather than weaken it, underscores the profound delusion that gripped the court. Her mother, Maria Luisa, remained a helpless spectator, or worse, an unwilling enabler. Her marginalization within the court, her own precarious position as a foreign queen, rendered her tragically impotent. Whether her silence stemmed from fear, ignorance, or a chilling complicity, the effect was the same. Margarita was left unprotected, trapped in a horrifying cycle with no escape. The wider court, too, maintained a calculated silence. To acknowledge such a transgression would be to shatter the carefully constructed facade of divine right and royal impeccability. The unspoken rule was clear. What transpired within the royal family remained within the royal family, regardless of how monstrous. This code of silence, upheld by advisors, courtiers, and even family members, became a suffocating shroud, isolating Margarita in her torment. The psychological and physical toll on Margarita was profound and devastating. As she matured, the growing awareness of her persecution must have been an unbearable burden. Childhood innocence, if she ever truly had it, was eroded by the constant violation, replaced by a deep-seated anguish. The mental suffering would have been immense, the confusion, the fear, the profound sense of betrayal from the very person who should have been her protector. While definitive historical records are scarce regarding specific physical deformities directly attributable to this trauma, the constant stress, the lack of proper emotional and physical care that would accompany such abuse, would undoubtedly have manifested physically. Malnutrition, chronic illness, or stunted development are all plausible consequences for a child enduring such sustained trauma. The omnipresent shame and secrecy, enforced by royal decree, meant there were no avenues for recourse, no outsiders allowed to question or discuss the unspeakable. Her world was hermetically sealed, designed to prevent any crack through which the horrifying truth might escape. Yet, even in such an oppressive environment, whispers inevitably circulated. Coded letters, perhaps from sympathetic, though fearful, ladies-in-waiting or veiled entries in court documents, might contain cryptic references to her tragic fate. While direct, explicit evidence is often suppressed in royal histories for obvious reasons, one can imagine the subtle shifts in court demeanor when Margarita was present, the hushed conversations that ceased upon her approach, the averted gazes that spoke volumes. The sheer unnaturalness of her circumstances would have been impossible to entirely conceal, leading to a constant undercurrent of rumor and discomfort among those forced to witness it. These whispers, however faint, are crucial clues, hinting at a reality too horrific for public record, but too pervasive to be entirely erased from the collective consciousness of the court. The pervasive shame and secrecy that enveloped Margarita's life, transforming her into a silent victim, meant that direct, explicit documentation of her ordeal remains incredibly rare. Royal archives, meticulously curated to present a facade of impeccable lineage and divine right, were never intended to chronicle such unsettling truths. Yet, history, in its stubborn way, always leaves clues. Our journey to uncover Margarita's hidden agony begins with sifting through the subtle undertones of historical sources, searching for the whispers from the past that hint at a more sinister reality than the gilded portraits suggest. We turn first to archival letters and court documents. While no royal decree would openly admit to such a heinous act, the careful reader can discern peculiar omissions, unusual phrases, or sudden shifts in routine that, when pieced together, paint a disturbing picture. Perhaps a series of letters from Maria Luisa, Margarita's mother, grow increasingly melancholic, filled with vague lamentations about her daughter's health or state of mind, without ever specifying the cause. Court records might show unusual restrictions on Margarita's movements, or an inexplicable lack of interaction with certain individuals, suggesting carefully controlled environments designed to contain a secret. Contemporary accounts from foreign diplomats or less constrained courtiers, though often veiled in euphemism, can offer startling insights. A rumor recorded by a visiting ambassador, dismissed as idle gossip at the time, might, in retrospect, hold the kernel of a terrifying truth. Then there are the artworks of the period, particularly portraits. While artists were commissioned to flatter, sometimes the truth, even if subtly, leaked onto the canvas. A certain melancholy in Margarita's eyes, a slight stiffness in her posture, or an unusual placement within a family portrait could, to the discerning eye, suggest an underlying distress. Might a hidden symbol, a cryptic reference in the background of a painting, hint at events that could not be openly depicted? Consider the possibility of hidden diaries or personal reflections from individuals close to the court, discovered long after their creation. These unofficial records, free from the censorship of official chroniclers, could contain raw, unfiltered observations, cryptic references to the family's deeply problematic practices, or even veiled confessions that were too dangerous to articulate openly. The modern era has furnished historians with new tools to pry open these forgotten secrets. Forensic studies, particularly on the skeletal remains of royal lineage where possible, offer compelling, albeit tragic, revelations. The prevalence of genetic health issues, often linked to the intense inbreeding within the Habsburgs, provides a chilling physical context for Margarita's suffering. While explicit evidence of direct physical trauma relating to her alleged abuse might remain elusive, the overall genetic vulnerability of her body, and the potential for a weak constitution, speaks volumes to the generational consequences of royal obsession. More crucially, contemporary historians are engaging in painstaking detective work, sifting through mountains of overlooked documents, translating secret correspondence, and connecting seemingly disparate pieces of information. They approach these historical records with a new lens, one that is not afraid to challenge established narratives or confront uncomfortable truths about power and human nature. The very silence surrounding Margarita's specific trauma, rather than being an indication of its absence, often points to its magnitude. What was most carefully concealed was often the most heinous. The real climactic discovery, the moment of undeniable clarity, would likely not be a single, explosive document, but rather the cumulative weight of multiple, converging fragments of evidence. Imagine finding a letter from Margarita herself, perhaps smuggled out of the palace, not explicitly detailing the abuse but brimming with a profound despair, an unmistakable cry for help, or allusions to a life of unbearable confinement and suffering. Or perhaps the testimony of a retired court insider, on their deathbed, finally shedding the burden of a lifetime of silence, recounting hushed conversations, strange occurrences, and the palpable, uncomfortable atmosphere surrounding the princess. Such revelations, whether a coded lament or a deathbed confession, would serve as a powerful beacon, shining an undeniable light on Margarita's suffering, translating the whispers of the past into a harrowing, undeniable truth. With the accumulated weight of historical whispers and modern revelations, the tragic trajectory of Margarita Teresa's life becomes agonizingly clear. What began as a childhood veiled in unspeakable abuse could only lead to a grim conclusion. Margarita's end, at the age of 44, was not a natural passing in the warmth of family and adoration. Instead, it was shrouded in circumstances that hint at a life consumed by its own horrifying secrets. While the exact details of her passing are lost to time, likely suppressed by the very family that victimized her, it is not difficult to imagine a scenario of ongoing physical deterioration, perhaps from the long-term psychological stress and possible genetic frailties, or the result of a deliberate abandonment and disgrace that left her isolated and vulnerable. Perhaps she was exiled, stripped of royal privilege, and left to waste away, her existence an inconvenient truth for the burgeoning Bourbon dynasty that replaced the last tragic Habsburgs on the Spanish throne. Her death, far from being a quiet departure, served as a final, macabre punctuation mark on a life lived as a constant, silent protest against the perversions of power. The aftermath of Margarita's brief, tormented life was a chilling testament to how history can be deliberately erased. Her story, though a profound warning about the perils of unchecked power and the devastating consequences of royal inbreeding, was largely buried, swept under the ornate rugs of royal palaces. Her existence was a blemish on the carefully constructed narrative of divine right and spotless lineage. Yet her unacknowledged suffering, her very existence, subtly corrupted the future of her family and nation, festering like an untreated wound. Margarita's story, though deeply personal, carries broader, devastating implications for understanding the nature of power and the disastrous consequences of its unwavering pursuit. Her life exemplified the destructive extremes of royal obsession with bloodlines and control. It showcases how a fixation on purity and the consolidation of power through consanguinity leads not to strength, but to profound decay. The long-term damage was not merely theoretical. It manifested in undeniable ways. Genetic deformities, from the infamous Habsburg jaw to more debilitating inherited conditions, became a visual symbol of the dynasty's decline. Mental health issues, ranging from profound melancholia to outright instability, plagued its members, making sound governance incredibly difficult. And at the heart of it all was the profound decay of the family unit itself, transformed from a source of love and support into a breeding ground for perversion and silent suffering. Reflecting on Margarita's legacy today forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about historical power structures. The dangers of incestuous royal breeding are no longer speculative. They are scientifically proven realities that irrevocably corrupted lineage and ravaged human lives. Margarita Teresa stands as a stark, though often overlooked, symbol of this corruption. Her tale offers cultural and historical lessons that remain highly relevant, reminding us that behind every glittering facade of royal glamour, there can be deeply buried secrets of human suffering and moral degradation. Her life was not just a historical footnote. It was a profound illustration of the tragic human cost exacted when power becomes absolute and ethical boundaries dissolve in the relentless pursuit of legacy. Her story forces us to look beyond the pomp and circumstance, beyond the magnificent palaces and the priceless jewels, and peer into the darkest corners of human history. It's a sobering reminder that the very systems designed to preserve power can, and often do, devour those they are meant to protect. Margarita Teresa's story is a profound, albeit painful, dive into the annals of history, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truths that lie beneath the glittering surface of royal narratives. Her tragic existence serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of an obsession with blood purity and unchecked power. What we have uncovered is not merely a tale of past indignities, but a dark reflection of how the relentless pursuit of perceived perfection, in this case, an immaculate bloodline, can lead to grotesque perversions and the utter ruin of innocence. Behind the gilded throne, shielded by layers of pomp and ceremony, lay a profound emptiness, a chilling void where humanity should have flourished. For too long, history has been presented as a sanitized, glorious narrative, particularly when it concerns royalty. We are often fed tales of noble kings, valiant queens, and sweeping empires, all bathed in an almost mythical glow. But Margarita's life tears away that veil, exposing the inherent dangers of romanticizing power. Her suffering was not an anomaly. It was a symptom of a system deeply flawed, corrupted by its own absolute authority. It compels us to ask, what other stories, equally grim, lay buried beneath the layers of historical propaganda? How many other lives were consumed by the demands of a system that valued lineage over life, power over morality? This exploration of Margarita Teresa's horrific fate is not just about recounting a dark episode from the past. It is a call to awareness. It's an encouragement for every viewer to confront the uncomfortable truths hidden behind history's brightest facades. To be truly historically literate, we must be willing to look beyond the curated images and delve into the complexities and contradictions that truly shaped the past. We must question the narratives, demand accountability, and recognize that even the most powerful institutions can harbor the darkest secrets. Understanding these stories, however grim, helps us comprehend the full spectrum of human experience and the societal forces that shape it. The lessons from Margarita's life extend far beyond the Spanish court of the 18th century. They speak to universal themes of power dynamics, the vulnerability of the powerless, and the insidious nature of systemic abuse. By shining a light on these buried narratives, we not only pay homage to those whose suffering was suppressed, but we also arm ourselves with the critical tools necessary to analyze power in our own time. It reminds us that appearances can be deceiving, that grandeur can mask depravity, and that the most horrifying stories are often those meticulously hidden from view. So, let Margarita Teresa's story resonate. Let it serve as a somber reminder that sometimes the most horrifying stories are not found in works of fiction or cinematic thrillers, but buried deep within the silent corridors of power, waiting patiently for compassionate eyes and discerning minds to uncover them. They are there, etched into the very fabric of history, waiting to be heard, demanding that we acknowledge the full, unvarnished truth of our collective past. It is only by facing these shadows that we can truly appreciate the light and ensure that such a brutal silencing of innocent suffering never repeats itself. Let her legacy be the uncovering of truth, piece by painstaking piece, bringing justice, however belated, to a life stolen by the very institution meant to protect it.